I never thought I'd get into a legal tug of war over a goddamn workshop, especially one I built with my own hands on my own land. But here we are. The sun was barely up when I walked outside with my usual mug of black coffee and took in the view of the structure I'd been working on for the past 8 months. A clean, modern equipment barn built on the north edge of my property. It wasn't some eyesore with rusted metal and caved-in siding. No, this thing was solid. Reinforced timber, insulated walls, smart lock doors, even solar panels on the roof. If anything, it made the area look better. At least I thought so. I'd bought this land over 6 years ago, just over 8 acres tucked on the edge of a sleepy hill country suburb outside Austin. The property had belonged to an old rancher who'd passed it down through 3 generations. When I bought it, the place was rough around the edges, fencing falling apart, no irrigation. The old barn back then was barely a skeleton, but I put in the time. A lot of time. Nights with a flashlight clamped in my teeth, weekends with bruised knuckles and splinters under my nails. Every post, bolt, and board mine. And I took pride in that. A few years ago, they started building a new housing development to the south of my lot. Cookie-cutter houses, artificial turf, HOA breathing down everyone's necks. They called it Meadowbrook Estates. It was the kind of place where every mailbox looked like it was ordered from the same catalog and every lawn mowed to the exact same height. I didn't care. They kept to themselves. I kept to myself. Live and let live, right? That fantasy shattered the morning I got a manila envelope taped to my front gate. No postage. Just bold print across the front. Urgent HOA. Violation notice. I nearly laughed when I saw it. Must have been a mistake. I figured I wasn't part of any homeowners association. My deed was clear. Independent zoning, rural residential use, no binding covenants. I opened it anyway. Curiosity getting the better of me. Inside was a 3-page letter written like a legal warning, claiming that the structure recently erected on the northern boundary of parcel 8,427, meaning my workshop, encroaches upon protected community greenbelt managed by the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. They demanded I cease occupation and remove the structure immediately or face escalating legal action. At first, I honestly thought someone was playing a joke, a really stupid one, but by the 3rd paragraph, I realized they were dead serious. And more annoyingly, the letter was signed by Diane Forrester, president of the HOA, complete with a gold-foiled seal that looked like it came from a wedding invitation printer. I didn't waste time. I pulled out my deed, plat maps, and boundary survey, all dated, notarized, and properly recorded when I bought the place. I double-checked everything. According to Travis County, my property line was exactly where I thought it was. No easement, no greenbelt, no shared community, anything. Just dirt, mesquite trees, and a hell of a lot of limestone rock. Still, I figured I'd be civil about it. Maybe it was a mapping error. Maybe someone new was trying to throw their weight around. I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered with the kind of clipped politeness you hear from people who never say please unless they're writing it in a cease and desist. Meadowbrook Estates HOA. This is Diane speaking. I introduced myself, told her I'd received the letter, and politely explained that I wasn't in their HOA, that the workshop was on private land, and that I had paperwork to prove it. She paused. Not long, maybe 2 seconds, but I could already hear the gears grinding in her head. Mr. Bennett, she said, our latest district mapping model shows that your structure infringes on HOA-managed territory. We're obligated to enforce compliance. I asked her what map she was referring to because I had the official records from the county. That may be, she replied coolly. But we had a third-party surveyor create a new 3D zoning overlay just last year. It updates parcel boundaries using modern satellite calibration. The model is far more precise than older plats. I almost dropped my coffee. You're telling me you used a private company to redraw my property line with a 3D model? It's not just your property, she said. It affects several adjacent parcels. The boundaries have shifted based on updated data. I was starting to see red. Diane, my boundaries haven't shifted. My deed says what it says, and my workshop is not going anywhere." She exhaled sharply. "Well, then I hope you're prepared for the legal consequences." She hung up. By the next day, things escalated. I found little pink survey flags stuck into the dirt around the base of the workshop, like some HOA land fairy had come overnight and tried to claim the place. One of the neighbors I barely knew, a guy named David Miller, dropped by in the afternoon with a six-pack and a warning. Apparently, they'd tried this kind of crap before back when they first built the neighborhood. Some drainage easement fight or something. Same tone, same Diane. I thanked him, but I was already 2 steps ahead. See, I'd had a hunch something like this might come up back when I started construction. That's why I'd built the workshop on a mobile platform. Reinforced, yes, but technically mounted to a custom trailer foundation. It was the same kind of trick used by pop-up tiny home folks and fairground vendors. According to zoning code, that made it a temporary agricultural structure, which meant it didn't require a traditional permit and couldn't be classified as a permanent building under zoning rules. But I wasn't going to roll that card out yet. First, I needed a formal survey, not just my old plat map. I called in a professional land surveyor I'd used before, a guy named Ray Chen, ex-military. Ran his own shop for over 25 years, carried more measuring gear than a NASA lab. We scheduled a full boundary verification. I told him to bring every damn laser, drone, and scanner he had. Something told me this wasn't going to go away with one polite phone call and a bottle of aspirin. When Ray showed up 3 days later, he had more equipment than most crime scene units. His truck looked like a mobile command center. The moment he stepped out, he gave me a firm handshake and a slow whistle toward the workshop. "You weren't kidding," he said. "That thing is solid. You built it yourself?" "With my own 2 hands. Apparently the HOA thinks it belongs to them," he snorted. "HOA people think everything belongs to them. Hell, they'd claim the moon if someone painted it the wrong shade of beige." We started at the southeastern corner, where the HOA's pink flags were stuck in the dirt like little planted insults. Ray opened his case, pulled out a high-precision GPS rover, then unfolded a tripod with a rotating laser. It beeped steadily as he leveled it. He looked down at the cluster of pink flags and shook his head. "These aren't legal markers. These are for marking sprinkler layouts. Someone from that HOA is playing pretend. Wouldn't be the first time they pretended to own something." He gave a quiet laugh, then got to work. For the next few hours, I followed Ray along the perimeter of my land. He worked methodically, almost surgically, taking readings, logging data into a handheld tablet, checking old boundary pins buried beneath the dirt. I helped clear brush and hold equipment, even though I didn't know what half of it did. The sun climbed higher as we worked. Ray didn't slow. The guy was a machine. Around midday, a silver Lexus SUV rolled up onto the gravel road that bordered my property. I recognized it instantly. The HOA president's chariot. The window rolled down and there she was, Diane Forrester. Sunglasses that probably cost as much as a used sedan. Expression like she smelled something unpleasant. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that looked freshly pressed despite the Texas heat. Behind her, in the passenger seat, sat a man in a blazer, probably their attorney. He was typing on a tablet, not even acknowledging us. Diane leaned out the window. "Mr. Bennett, you are conducting unauthorized survey work on community property." I swear, Ray almost choked on his own laugh. "This is private land," I said, "and last I checked, measuring the dirt I own isn't a crime." She glanced at Ray. "You are trespassing. We have the most recent 3D zoning overlay proving this area belongs to Meadowbrook Estates." Ray straightened up like a soldier addressing a superior officer, except without the respect. "Ma'am," he said, "I am a state-licensed land surveyor with 25 years in the field. Unless the law changed this morning, the only legal boundaries are the ones recorded in the county archives, not your digital scrapbook." Her lips twitched. I don't think she was used to being spoken to like that. Our map was generated by TerraGeo mapping solutions. It uses LiDAR, satellite calibration, and topographical reconstruction. It is more accurate than some antiquated metal stakes. Ray calmly tapped a rusted metal pin we'd just unearthed. You mean stakes like the federal government installed during the 1,960 seconds land allotment? Those stakes? Silence. Even the attorney paused his keyboard clicking. Diane cleared her throat. Regardless, we will be submitting a complaint. And she waved her hand vaguely at the workshop, illegal structure must be removed. At that moment, I was dangerously close to offering to remove her instead. Instead, I smiled. Funny thing, the workshop isn't a permanent structure. The attorney finally looked up. What do you mean by that? I pointed at the foundation. If you looked closely, you could see the steel plate base, the joints where modular panels connected to reinforced beams. Not obvious to a casual observer, but very obvious if you knew what to look for. It's technically a mobile agricultural unit, I said, built on a custom foundation with integrated wheel mounts. If needed, I could hook up a tractor and move it, which makes it exempt from residential permanent structure zoning. Ray flashed me a look that said, "You magnificent bastard." Diane's face twitched. She understood what that meant. They couldn't demand demolition of something that wasn't classified as a building. "You engineered a barn on wheels?" the attorney asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. "Temporary structure," I corrected. "Check the municipal code. Section 1.4, paragraph 5, sub-item C. I had a feeling someone might try to cause trouble, so I built accordingly." The attorney closed his tablet without another word. Diane looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. "This isn't over," she snapped. She rolled up the window and sped away, tires squealing like a toddler's tantrum. Ray let out a breathy laugh. "Son, that might be the most preemptively brilliant thing I've ever seen." "I'm proud of you." We finished the boundary verification just before sunset. Ray packed up his equipment, promising he'd process the data and pull archived county maps for comparison. He didn't say anything dramatic when he left. He just tapped his clipboard and said, "If they're wrong, we'll prove it, and if they're lying, we'll bury them." I watched his taillights disappear down the long driveway as the sky turned deep orange. My land was quiet again. The workshop stood tall, shadows stretching long across the dirt. But in the pit of my stomach, I could feel something shifting. The HOA wasn't bluffing. They weren't backing off. They were gearing up for war. The report came in 4 days later. Ray dropped it off himself, walking through the front gate with a binder thick enough to kill a man. He looked more amused than usual, like someone who'd just discovered buried treasure under a neighbor's rose garden. "You might want to pour yourself a drink," he said, handing me the binder. "You're going to enjoy this." Inside were annotated diagrams, scanned plats, satellite overlays, and legal descriptions stretching back over 50 years. Every measurement, every pin, every bearing and distance had been confirmed. The result was clear as daylight. The HOA's shiny new homes were the ones that had breached the line. Not by a little, either. Several properties, fences, patios, even part of their so-called community park were squatting on my land. 18 feet. That was the average intrusion along a 240-foot stretch of the southern border. One property even had a deck and hot tub planted squarely in what was legally my soil. I stared at the numbers, then at the aerial map where Ray had drawn my legal boundary in thick red ink. It cut through 5 backyards and ran directly under one of their playground structures. I turned to Ray. "You're sure?" "As sure as gravity," he said. "They built over your lot line. Someone, probably their developer, fudged the coordinates. Sloppy work, but good enough to pass under the radar until now." He tapped a page near the back. "And here's the kicker. Their 3D map, the one they're waving around like it's divine law, it's based on a third-party zoning overlay. No official county stamp. Not even a certified surveyor's seal. It's basically a glorified estimate." I felt something between rage and amusement bubbling up. "They were threatening to sue me using a digital cartoon." "Oh, it gets better," he said. "I found the original zoning approval paperwork, the subdivision plan. It was fast-tracked by a now-retired municipal planner who had financial ties to the development firm. It's all public record. You just have to know where to dig. That was all I needed to hear. The next day I walked into the Travis County Recorder's office with Ray's report in one hand and my deed in the other. I filed a formal affidavit asserting my boundary rights and requesting a review of the Meadowbrook Estates development plan due to encroachment. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 60s with half-moon glasses and a Diet Coke, looked up at the documents and murmured, "Oh, hell," before calling her supervisor. By the time I got home, I already had 2 voicemails. One was from the planning department, asking me to please schedule a meeting. The second was from a local news reporter. Somehow, word was spreading. The HOA responded just as fast. The next morning, I found a large envelope in my mailbox, thick and very official looking. Inside, a cease and desist letter from their legal team, claiming I was maliciously interfering with community harmony and accusing me of constructing a non-compliant structure with intent to provoke. I almost choked on my coffee. They were trying to paint me as some kind of barn-building terrorist. That afternoon, I met with my attorney, Sophie Rodriguez. She'd handled property disputes in the Austin area for over 12 years. When I showed her the documents, she leaned back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "They screwed up," she said. "Big time. If your line is accurate and based on Ray's report, it is then they're the ones trespassing." She tapped her pen against the cease and desist letter. "This? It's theater. They're trying to scare you off. But they've got a major liability issue on their hands." I asked her what my next move should be. "First, we file a formal notice of encroachment with the county and deliver copies to each of the homeowners affected. That'll light a few fires. Then we notify the HOA and developer that we intend to pursue civil action for unlawful use of your property unless they're prepared to negotiate." I nodded. "Let's start the fire." By the end of the week, we'd sent out over 15 registered letters. Each included high-resolution images of the surveyed boundary line, Ray's professional report, and a polite but firm explanation that several structures currently resided without permission on private land. Reactions started coming in fast. A middle-aged man from one of the corner homes, Tom Walsh, I think his name was, showed up at my gate one evening holding the letter and looking pale. "Listen," he said, "I had no idea. I didn't build the place. We bought it 2 years ago. I've got kids, man. If I'd known the yard wasn't even ours." I told him I wasn't after his kid's swing set. I just wanted this bullshit to stop. He nodded and promised to talk to some of the other homeowners. The next day, a woman from 2 doors down, Rachel something, emailed Sophie directly, asking how they could make this right without losing their backyard. It was a shift. A real one. People who had stood behind their HOA's smug letters and threats were now realizing they'd been sold a fantasy built on stolen dirt. I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the guy holding the receipts. And the HOA? They were starting to sweat. By the time the preliminary court hearing was scheduled, the air around Meadowbrook Estates was tighter than a jar of pickles sealed in 1973. The once pristine sidewalks were lined with murmurs, sideways glances, and neighbors who now avoided eye contact when I passed. Diane Forrester, however, was walking around like she was running for office, trying to hold the HOA together with passive-aggressive newsletters and emergency community morale barbecues. I didn't get an invite. Sophie was relentless. She drafted the complaint like she was loading a shotgun, clean, direct, and deadly. We weren't just asking for a boundary correction. We were demanding acknowledgement of encroachment, damages for unlawful use of private land, and the cost of restoring lost use over the past 4 years. The total claim, just over $920,000. The courtroom smelled faintly of air conditioning and nerves. Diane showed up in a pressed beige suit with her overpriced attorney from downtown Austin, some guy named Kirk, whose tie cost more than my truck's last oil change. I came in wearing jeans and a collared shirt that still smelled a little like sawdust. The judge was an older woman named Judge Patricia Ramirez, sharp eyes, salt and pepper bun, zero patience for theatrics. She opened the proceedings and gestured for Sophie to begin. Sophie started strong. She introduced Ray's professional report, the historical plat maps, aerial photos, and the notarized affidavit I'd filed with the county. Then she dropped the final piece, a printed copy of the HOA's 3D zoning overlay map, complete with a bright red disclaimer at the bottom, for visual reference only. Not a certified legal survey. I looked over at Diane. She didn't blink, but her jaw tightened. Her attorney shifted in his chair. Sophie closed her opening with one line I still think about. My client built a movable structure on his legally defined property. The HOA built permanent homes on land they don't own. One of these things is not like the other. Then it was Kirk's turn. He started with flair, claimed the HOA had operated in good faith based on modern data, argued that parcel shifts were minor and incidental, tried to lean into the idea that my workshop was provocative and intentionally disruptive. Ramirez cut him off. Counselor, is your client asserting that property boundaries defined by the county recorder can be superseded by third-party modeling? He flinched. Your Honor, our data reflects the most current technological interpretation of no. Answer the question. He paused. No, Your Honor. Ramirez nodded and made a note. That's when the real damage hit. Sophie introduced public records showing that the developer who built Meadowbrook Estates had ties to the now-retired municipal planner who'd approved the original zoning. Emails, campaign contributions, a suspiciously timed real estate trust. Not enough for criminal charges, but more than enough to show negligence or even coordinated fraud. Ramirez didn't issue a final ruling that day. This was only a preliminary hearing. But her temporary order spoke volumes. No further action could be taken against me. Any HOA communication demanding removal of my structure was to cease immediately. I walked out of that courtroom a free man. My workshop wasn't going anywhere. And Diane? She looked like someone had put a raccoon in her handbag. But the damage wasn't just legal, it was social. Word spread fast. 2 days later, the HOA's private Facebook group, which, yes, I was absolutely monitoring through Tom Walsh, exploded. Half the residents were furious they'd been lied to. The other half were terrified they'd lose their homes. One guy posted a panicked message asking if he should start looking for lawyers to defend his patio. That week, Tom stopped by my gate again. This time he brought coffee and sat down with me on the porch. I think we're calling a vote, he said, on whether Diane should stay on as president. I raised an eyebrow. And, he smirked, I've got 19 people on board. We only need 23. Diane wasn't just losing her legal ground, she was losing her empire. Meanwhile, Sophie filed an additional motion with the court, a formal notice of demand for negotiated restitution, giving the HOA a chance to settle before we filed full suit. It was bait. If they ignored it, we'd hit them for everything. If they bit well, I had plans for that too. But the best moment of the week? The HOA sent out a new bulletin to all Meadowbrook residents. The opening line read, "Due to ongoing legal clarification of boundary definitions, please refrain from making statements regarding property ownership during neighborhood meetings or online discussions." Translation, shut up and hope the lawyer fixes it. Things were finally tilting. And this time, I wasn't the only one pulling the strings. But then just when everything seemed to be going my way, the ground shifted beneath me. It started with a phone call from Sophie on a Tuesday morning. Her voice was tight, controlled the way it gets when she's delivering bad news. "Marcus, we have a problem." I set down my coffee. What kind of problem? Diane's legal team filed an emergency appeal. They're claiming procedural error in how the preliminary hearing was conducted. They say Judge Ramirez didn't allow sufficient time for them to present counter evidence. That's bullshit. They had 3 weeks. I know. But they filed with a different judge, Judge Leonard Hayes. Let's say, he's more sympathetic to corporate entities. And he granted a stay pending review. My stomach dropped. A stay? What does that mean? It means the temporary protective order is suspended. It means the HOA can continue enforcement actions against you while the appeal is processed. I felt the ground tilt. Are you serious? Completely. And there's more. They've hired a new firm, Brennan and Associates. They specialize in HOA defense. Very aggressive, very expensive, and they're bringing in their own surveyor to challenge Ray's findings. I stood up, pacing. Can they do that? Unfortunately, yes. If their surveyor claims even a margin of error in Ray's measurements, Hayes might rule that the boundary is disputed and send it to a full trial, which could take months, maybe a year. And in the meantime, her silence said everything. By the next morning, the HOA was back on the attack. A new letter arrived, this time hand-delivered by a process server. It was a formal demand for immediate removal of the unlawfully placed structure within 14 days or face daily fines of $500. I called Sophie immediately. They're threatening $500 a day. I know. I got a copy too. We're filing an emergency counter motion, but Marcus... Hayes might not hear it for 2 weeks. 2 weeks? That's $7,000. I'm aware. That afternoon, I drove into town to pick up supplies. At the hardware store, I ran into David Miller, the neighbor who'd warned me early on. He wouldn't make eye contact. "Hey, David," I said. He glanced up, uncomfortable. "Hey, Marcus, listen, I can't really be seen talking to you right now." I blinked. "What?" Diane's lawyers sent letters to everyone who signed Tom's petition. Said anyone who materially assists you could be held liable for damages if the HOA wins the appeal. That's insane. Maybe, but people are scared. Rachel pulled her email. Tom's not answering his phone. It's just safer to stay out of it. He walked away without another word. I stood there in the aisle, holding a box of screws, feeling the walls close in. By the end of the week, the whispers had turned into a roar. The local news ran a follow-up piece, but this time, the tone had shifted. The headline: Property dispute takes unexpected turn. Homeowners caught in crossfire. They interviewed Diane. She sat in her living room, looking calm, measured, almost sympathetic. "We're not the villains here," she said. "We're trying to protect our community from someone who refuses to follow reasonable guidelines. And now, because of his stubbornness, innocent families are being dragged into a legal nightmare." The reporter asked about the survey findings. Diane smiled thin, practiced. "Surveys can be interpreted in many ways. We have experts who disagree with Mr. Bennett's claims. The truth will come out in court." I watched the segment with my hands clenched. She was good. She was spinning this like I was the aggressor. That night, I got an email from Ray. "Marcus, I need to talk. Call me." I called. He answered on the first ring. "What's going on?" He sighed. "Their new surveyor guy named Preston. He's claiming that the original federal survey pins I used were potentially compromised because they're over 50 years old. Says environmental erosion could have shifted them. That's ridiculous. I know, but he's filing a report that suggests a margin of error of up to 20 feet. If the judge accepts that, it throws our entire boundary claim into question. Can he do that? Legally, it's a gray area. Ethically, it's garbage. But Marcus, if Hayes rules that the boundary is indeterminate, we're back to square one. I sat down heavily. So we could lose. We could lose. That was the moment, the exact moment when doubt crept in. Not doubt about the facts. I knew I was right. The land was mine. The survey was accurate. But doubt about whether the system would care, because sometimes the truth doesn't matter if the person with more money can afford to bury it. Sophie called the next morning. Her voice was flat. Hayes issued a preliminary opinion. He's ruling that the boundary is materially disputed and requires a full evidentiary hearing. Trial set for 4 months from now. 4 months? And in the meantime, the HOA's enforcement actions stand, which means the fines start accruing. I did the math. $500 a day for 4 months. Over $60,000. I can't afford that. I know. What do I do? Long pause. Honestly, Marcus, you could settle. Take the workshop down. Walk away. Cut your losses. I stared out the window at the structure I'd built with my own hands. Or, I asked, or we fight. But I need you to understand, this isn't about right and wrong anymore. It's about who can outlast who. That night, I sat on my porch as the sun set over the hill country. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt the edges of defeat creeping in. Not because I was wrong, but because the system, this beautiful, terrible, broken system, might not care. And then, at 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your email. You're going to want to see this. I opened my laptop. New message. No subject line. Just an attachment. A scanned document. Titled, Meadowbrook Estates, Original Development Agreement 1987. I opened it, and what I saw made my blood run cold then hot with vindication. It was the original purchase agreement between the developer and the county. Buried in the fine print page 47, paragraph 12 was a clause I'd never seen before. All structures within development boundaries must maintain a minimum 25-foot setback from adjacent non-member parcels to preserve historical land use integrity. 25 feet. The HOA homes were only 18 feet from my boundary. They were in violation of their own development agreement. But there was more. Attached to the document was a memo dated 3 months before construction began from the retired planner to the developer. Recommend adjusting plat to maximize lot sizes. Setback requirement. Unlikely to be enforced post-approval. It was conspiracy. In writing. I forwarded everything to Sophie. She called back 2 minutes later, voice sharp with energy. Where did you get this? Anonymous tip. This changes everything. If we can authenticate this, and I think we can, it proves the HOA knowingly violated their own development terms. Hayes will have to reconsider. Can we file it? We're filing it tonight. 3 days later, we were back in court. Sophie presented the documents to Judge Hayes. His expression didn't change, but I saw him make several notes. Diane's attorney tried to argue that the documents were irrelevant, that they pertained to the original construction, not current boundary disputes. Hayes cut him off. Counselor, if your client built in violation of their own development agreement, that speaks directly to good faith. I'm admitting this evidence. He looked at Diane. Miss Forrester, did you know about this setback requirement? She hesitated. Just for a second. I would need to review the original documents. That's not an answer. Her attorney jumped in. Your Honor, Miss Forrester wasn't involved in the original development, but she is president of the HOA that benefits from it. And according to this memo, someone knew they were cutting corners. Hayes closed the file. I'm reversing my stay. The preliminary order is reinstated. Furthermore, I'm ordering an independent audit of the original development to determine compliance with county regulations. The gavel fell. Diane went pale. Her attorney looked like he'd been hit by a truck. And just like that, the breaking point became the breakthrough. Because someone, somewhere, had finally had enough of the HOA's lies. And they'd handed me the proof I needed to end it. The final hearing came 3 weeks later, and this time, there was no ambiguity. No room for appeals, no legal acrobatics. Sophie walked into that courtroom like a prosecutor with a signed confession. Judge Ramirez was back on the bench. Hayes had recused himself after the document revelations, and she looked like someone who'd spent the week reading every word of the development file and wasn't happy about what she'd found. Diane showed up with a different attorney this time. The expensive guy from downtown had quietly excused himself from the case. The new lawyer looked young, nervous, and underprepared. Sophie didn't waste time. She presented Ray's survey confirmed by 2 independent reviewers. She introduced the original 1987 development agreement showing the 25-foot setback violation. She showed the internal memo proving the developer knew they were cutting corners. Then, she dropped the final piece, a forensic analysis of the HOA's 3D mapping model conducted by a university professor who specialized in geospatial data. His conclusion? The model had been manually adjusted, overriding satellite data to shift the boundary line in the HOA's favor. It wasn't just inaccurate, it was falsified. Ramirez didn't even wait for closing arguments. She issued her ruling from the bench. The court formally recognized my original property line as binding. It confirmed that 7 Meadowbrook homes and 3 community assets, a walking trail, a playground, and a decorative fountain were illegally built on my land. The HOA was ordered to cease all claims, remove all pink markers, and this part made me smirk, issue a public statement acknowledging the mistake. The judge even required them to post it on their official website for 90 days. And then came the part I'd been waiting for. Sophie stood and introduced our motion for compensatory damages. She laid it out clearly. Loss of exclusive use of a portion of my land for over 4 years, market value impact, legal costs, emotional distress. The total, $920,000. You could hear Diane's soul leave her body. Her attorney objected, claimed the HOA couldn't be held responsible for developer negligence, that the residents themselves shouldn't be punished for a planning error. That's when Sophie brought out the ace. We're not asking for home demolitions. We're offering resolution. Mr. Bennett is willing to lease the encroached land approximately 18 feet per affected lot under a 99-year ground lease for $1 annually per property. Ramirez leaned back. A symbolic settlement, Sophie nodded. One designed to preserve the community while still honoring property rights. The judge looked at me. Is that your offer, Mr. Bennett? I nodded. I'm not looking to ruin anyone's life. I just want what's mine, acknowledged. She scribbled something in her notebook and muttered, We could use more people like you in court. The room was silent, except for Diane's attorney whispering furiously with her. The HOA accepted the terms. They had no choice. Ramirez entered the final ruling that day. Everything was official. My land was mine again, in writing, in law, in blood and sweat. The HOA's demands were vacated, their threats nullified. Their authority cracked at its foundation. As we left the courthouse, Sophie smiled. Nice win. I shook my head. Not a win. A warning shot. The fallout began immediately. Diane resigned the next day. Technically stepped down for health reasons, but everyone knew better. Tom Walsh was nominated interim president. The first thing he did was hold an open forum to reset community trust. I didn't go, but I heard from David, who'd finally started talking to me again, that Tom started the meeting by saying, Our HOA almost got us sued into the Stone Age. Let's start by not threatening the guy who owns the dirt we stand on. The neighborhood started shifting. People were suddenly friendlier, cautious, but not cold. I got a couple of apology notes taped to my gate. One even came with homemade cookies. I threw those away, just in case. But the best part? The HOA had to pay my legal fees. All of them. Every bill Sophie sent, every drone flight Ray conducted, every certified envelope, on their dime. That, plus the lease terms, made sure I came out of this whole thing with profit, peace, and plenty of popcorn-worthy memories. They tried to bury me with paperwork. Turns out I read fine print for fun. It took less than a week for the HOA to start eating itself alive. The moment Diane stepped down, the power vacuum turned Meadowbrook Estates into a passive-aggressive battlefield. Every homeowner with a grudge or a complaint suddenly found their spine and their voice. Petty grievances, simmering beneath the surface for years, erupted like a clogged sewer. There were public threads accusing board members of favoritism, accusations about misused HOA dues, even a rumor that someone had embezzled money from the landscaping fund. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it were true. The shrubs looked like they were planted by a blindfolded goat. Tom Walsh did what he could to stabilize things. I'll give him credit. He held meetings twice a week, opened financial records, invited third-party audits, but he was putting out fires with a garden hose. HOA morale had plummeted. And now that the threat of my supposedly illegal workshop was off the table, folks had nothing to rally around except their mutual contempt for each other. The funny part? While they unraveled, I thrived. People who'd once glared at me in the grocery store now nodded politely. Some even apologized. One woman, Miriam, brought me a pie. I didn't eat it. I'm not suicidal. But I appreciated the gesture. And David? He practically became my unofficial PR rep. He'd show up with folding chairs and a six-pack, plop down by the fence, and loudly explain the entire saga to anyone who passed. "Y'all tried to bully a guy who built a workshop smarter than your homes?" he'd say. "Man's got more sense in his damn driveway than Diane had in her whole head. I couldn't have said it better myself." The HOA tried to quietly rewrite some of their bylaws. They held a vote to limit the board's power over properties outside HOA boundaries, which, should have been obvious from the start. Tom proposed mandatory property surveys before any new enforcement action. That alone probably saved them from 5 more lawsuits. Meanwhile, Sophie kept receipts. She filed the ground lease agreements with the county and made damn sure every homeowner with an encroaching structure got their copy signed and notarized. One family sent theirs back with a thank you card and a gift certificate to a steakhouse. Another stapled theirs to a handwritten apology. One guy just left his lease in my mailbox with a $20 bill and a sticky note that said, "Sorry, I didn't cash it." But I framed the note. A week later, I got a call from a local reporter who'd been following the case. Turns out the whole saga was turning into a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. They ran a segment called Lines in the Sand when homeowners fight back. I sat on my porch with Ray and David, watching it on a beat-up laptop, sipping beers while they laughed at how the HOA came off like a discount mafia. Sophie even got quoted. Her line, "He didn't win just because he was right. He won because he was prepared." Damn straight. A month passed. The workshop stood exactly where I'd built it, proud and unmoved, casting its long afternoon shadow across the dirt like it owned the place, which, legally, it damn well did. Life slowed down. The HOA kept their distance. Tom emailed once about a community collaboration initiative, which I ignored. The truth is, I wasn't interested in alliances or fences mended with handshakes and lemonade. I didn't want revenge either. I just wanted quiet. And I got it. Mostly, then, on a Wednesday morning, something unexpected happened. A black pickup pulled into my driveway. Out stepped a guy in his 30s, crisp, buttoned down, clipboard under his arm, government clean. He introduced himself as an agent with the county's Planning and Preservation Office. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said quickly, seeing my expression. Quite the opposite. Apparently, Ray's report, along with Sophie's filings and the media attention, had triggered a historical zoning review. The land my workshop was on? Turns out it had been part of a 19th century homestead, one of the few remaining undeveloped plots from a land grant issued in 1876, the old barn ruins I'd torn down. They weren't just falling apart, they were technically heritage structures, which meant, under county code, my land was now listed on a regional heritage map. I blinked. "So, what does that mean?" he smiled. "It means you're now eligible for tax incentives, agricultural preservation credits, and if you want a historical plaque." I stared at him. "So now it's not just mine. It's protected." "Exactly." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Loud, full-bellied, workshop-echoing laughter. After everything they threw at me, the threats, the fake maps, the court dates, the county itself was now telling the world, not only was I right, I was historically right. The next weekend, I hosted a small cookout. David brought ribs, Ray brought moonshine, Sophie showed up in jeans and boots and drank everyone under the table. At some point, someone asked what I was going to do now. I looked out at my land, the workshop, the shadows of fences that would never be redrawn. "Nothing," I said, "not one damn thing." And it felt perfect.